I was trying to tie the exercises you picked to mechanics and how a hip shift would bias inhalation and exhalation. Could definitely be covered in a debrief if you already haven't. Good question. What is a hip shift? A hip shift is where you're pushing one part of the pelvis back in relation to the opposite side. And when I think of a hip shift, what I really think of is rotating the sacrum towards one direction or not. So if I'm going to shift my hips to the left, the sacrum is going to rotate to the left. If I rotate the sacrum to the left, you're going to have left counter nutation and some right nutation happening to make that occur. Vice versa if I go to the right. And now you can have varying degrees depending on also what we talked about before with the squat. What degree of hip flexion do I have when I'm doing this shift? For example, if I do a hip shift at 0 to 60, that's going to be more ER biased towards the extremity. And subsequently, that's going to drive greater counter nutation at that range. So, like it's weird how John brought this up because I have been doing a bit more shifting in clinic. But when you do higher depth shifts, I will do that to try to restore hip external rotation, or if someone's got a loss of hip flexion. One of those two things will be the route that I go. Now, let's say you have someone who's got a loss of IR. Split squat, we'll say. Because if I'm split squatting and I shift here, because I'm at 90 degrees of hip flexion at the bottom, we'll say, when I shift, I'm going to be driving further internal rotation because me rotating the sacrum to the left is going to drive more IR at the femur. So this is going to actually increase some degree of nutation on the left-hand side in internal rotation. So you can see how the same action has different consequences at the pelvis based on when and where and how I do it. So you could totally justify doing either shift depending on what you're going after. If you got someone who's got a loss of IR, hip shifting exercises or doing a split squat with a shift could be a great move. You got someone who's got a loss of ER, you could do a higher depth offset squat to elicit the change. Or you could do an offset squat all the way down. Either way, you're still driving external rotation or relative internal rotation depending on the amount of range you're working in and what movement you're going for. That's the big thing when you talk about hip shifting. To summarize, your great question, a hip shift involves rotation through the pelvis, one direction or the other. You do have some changes at the innominate, obviously, but I like to think sacral rotation. The ER or IR that's driven is going to depend on the amount of hip flexion that you are doing the shift in. High or low degrees of hip flexion, you're going to get more ER. Mid-range, you're going to get more IR. And the hip shift can be a great way to enhance the effect because you're pushing towards a more end range that a simple tuck wouldn't get you. That being said, if you're going to work on shifting, make sure you have the stack in place because if you try to shift and they can't maintain the stack position, they're going to lose pelvic position and not get the adaptations that you desire.